20 million people in Britain were checking football scores, weather updates, and breaking news on their televisions before most of them had even heard the word internet. They punched in 3-digit codes and then just waited. Sometimes 5 seconds, sometimes 30. And somehow, that felt normal. It ran from 1974 to 2012. It literally outlived the Soviet Union, and when it finally died, newspapers printed mock obituaries in its signature blocky yellow text on black background. The BBC had accidentally hidden an information network inside the TV signal itself, and for nearly 4 decades, it was how Britain got its news. Ceefax started because BBC engineers in the late 1960s were trying to solve a completely different problem. Jeff Larkby and Barry Pyatt were experimenting with something called Ceefax. The idea was simple: send a single newspaper page overnight when no one was watching TV. The Director General at the time, Sir Hugh Carleton Green, loved the concept. He imagined farmers and investors printing stock prices and market data from their televisions at 3 in the morning. There was just one problem. The printer was loud, clunky, and completely impractical. Nobody wanted that in their living room at 3 a.m. But the idea didn't die. Around the same time, a Philips designer named John Adams was working on something more elegant. Instead of printing anything, he proposed encoding text directly into the unused portions of the television signal itself. Instead, he suggested using the empty space in a TV signal, data that normally just goes unused. The BBC grabbed onto this concept and started building what would become Ceefax. The BBC loved the idea and ran with it, began test transmissions shortly after, and on 23 September 1974, just before that year's general election, an experimental service with about 30 pages formally launched. In the beginning, almost nobody used it. Teletext-capable televisions were rare and expensive. One BBC reminiscence jokes that there might have been only 4 such TVs in the entire United Kingdom initially. The audience was mostly engineers and enthusiasts who understood what they were looking at. The Independent Broadcasting Authority was developing its own rival system called Oracle for ITV, and the two were incompatible. It took until 1974 for the BBC, IBA, and the manufacturer's body Brema to agree on a single UK teletext specification, which later became World System Teletext and got codified as ITUR BT.653. That standard defined the familiar 24 rows by 40 characters layout and ensured any UK teletext TV could decode both Ceefax and ITV's services. The system was simple, but it had limits. Each page could only show 24 rows, 40 characters each. That's it.
Pages were transmitted in a continuous loop alongside the normal television picture. When someone entered a page number, their TV's decoder would sit and wait for that specific page to come around again in the broadcast carousel. Sometimes it showed up instantly, sometimes you sat there for half a minute staring at a blank screen. It was like a conveyor belt. You just waited for your page to come around. The visual result was distinctive: bright primary colored headers, white or yellow text on black backgrounds, large block graphics for charts and weather maps. Everything had to fit within about 80 words because that was the physical limit of what could be displayed on one screen.
Through the late 1970s and early 1980s, teletext sets became cheaper and started appearing as standard equipment on rented TVs. In 1980, the BBC began broadcasting something called Ceefax in Vision during daytime downtime on BBC One and BBC Two. Instead of showing test cards with background music, they displayed rolling selections of Ceefax pages. This single decision exposed millions of casual viewers to the service who might never have pressed the text button on their remote otherwise. By the early 1990s, Ceefax offered around 600 pages and was being used by roughly 20 to 22 million people per week. The web was starting to exist at this point, but most people in Britain had never seen it. The pages were organized into sections. The 100s carried news, the 200s had business information, the 300s covered sport, the 400s showed weather and travel, the 500s handled entertainment, including national lottery results, the 600s listed TV and radio schedules. Page 888 was subtitles. People built habits around it. Football fans lived on page 302 during match days. Cricket obsessives checked the scores constantly. Prime Minister John Major would slip out of meetings in Downing Street to check cricket results on Ceefax. Lord Coe said he relied on it for athletics updates and Chelsea Football Club's fortunes. Families left their televisions tuned to Ceefax pages as background information wallpaper. Inside the BBC, running Ceefax required a specific kind of journalism. Colin McIntyre became the first editor when the service launched, initially maintaining about 24 news pages by himself from a small office in Television Centre. Early journalists monitored wire services like Reuters readers and the Press Association, then manually typed pages at production terminals. After finishing a page, they had to produce punched tape and physically walk it down to the central apparatus room where it could be loaded into the core store that transmitted the pages.
A single spelling mistake meant recutting the entire tape and making the trip again. Former staff members recall that squeezing stories into 80 words taught them ruthless discipline. Some later described it as invaluable training for modern digital journalism because it forced clarity and brevity. The service had practical applications beyond news. Page 888 became the near-universal UK code for subtitles, allowing deaf and hard-of-hearing viewers to toggle captions on or off. This was a genuine accessibility breakthrough compared to permanently burned-in captions. In the 1980s, Ceefax even experimented with broadcasting telesoftware for the BBC Micro home computer. Small programs transmitted as teletext data that users could download and run. Over-the-air software distribution through the television signal. The experiment is almost completely forgotten now. Mistakes happened. The most notorious came on 11 November 1994 when a rehearsal script for the Queen Mother's eventual obituary accidentally appeared on Ceefax, briefly reporting her death before being removed after about 30 seconds. The BBC apologized. Staff accounts from the punched tape era describe how errors were painful to fix, which encouraged intense attention to detail. Critics complained that teletext was slow and frustrating compared to what the web would offer, waiting for pages to cycle, being limited to tiny amounts of text per screen. Fans defended its clarity and the lack of information overload. From the mid-1990s onwards, the internet, 24-hour news channels, and richer digital TV interfaces started eroding Ceefax's central role. The BBC ceased Ceefax on digital satellite in 2002, replacing it with a limited text service and the red button interface. Other broadcasters' teletext services on ITV and Channel 4 shut down between 2009 and 2011. Ceefax became the last analog text service still running. It finally went dark at 23:32:19 BST on 23 October 2012 when Olympic champion Dame Mary Peters switched off the last analog TV signal in Northern Ireland as part of the UK's digital switchover. Page 100 displayed a farewell graphic reading 1974 to 2012, thanks for watching. The closure triggered waves of affection and nostalgia. Newspapers ran mocked-up Ceefax front pages. Twitter users joked that future children would never believe something so primitive had existed. A satirical Ceefax suicide note appeared, widely reported at the time, lamenting that what was once cutting edge was now dismissed as old-fashioned, and tongue-in-cheek accusing the BBC of ageism towards the service. UK culture ministers called Ceefax a revolution in public access to information. The Plain English campaign gave it a Lifetime Achievement Award for clear, jargon-free language. The comparison to the modern internet is stark. Ceefax ran on a one-way broadcast network, data hidden in the vertical blinking interval of the TV signal. The web uses two-way packet networks over IP. Ceefax navigation was 3-digit page numbers and simple menus. The web has URLs, hyperlinks, search engines. Ceefax offered text and very simple block graphics. The web delivers text, images, audio, video, interactive applications. Ceefax was read-only. Viewers couldn't upload content. The web is read-write, with user-generated content everywhere. Ceefax made people wait for pages to loop through the carousel up to 30 seconds. The web is on demand, usually delivering in seconds or less. Ceefax had no personalization. Everyone saw the same pages. The web offers highly personalized feeds and recommendations. Yet people called it Britain's first internet for specific reasons. It put on-demand, constantly updated information directly in people's homes long before the web browser existed. A BBC history piece explicitly called Ceefax the start of interactive television services now taken for granted. A 2019 analysis argued that though slow and frustrating by modern standards, it prepared audiences for the World Wide Web and even social media. Tech historians liken Ceefax's menus and numbered pages to an extremely simplified form of the web. Non-linear navigation, following links that were just page numbers, near real-time updates, all delivered through a one-way broadcast pipe instead of a two-way network. Enthusiasts have kept the spirit alive. Peter Kwan's Ceefax project uses a Raspberry Pi to feed teletext-style pages into old television.
televisions. A standalone Ceefax simulator pulls live data from BBC RSS feeds and displays it in faithful Ceefax typography on modern devices. In 2016, and again around the 50th anniversary in 2024, articles, YouTube documentaries, and fan communities celebrated the 1970s origins, the pages from Ceefax on-air loops, even jokes like British satirist Lord Buckethead's manifesto pledge to bring back Ceefax. The BBC's Red Button tech service on digital TV was positioned as Ceefax's successor, keeping the idea of on-screen text menus alive for another generation before the corporation began phasing it out around 2020. What remains is the memory of a service that existed in the gap between 3 television channels and the always connected scroll forever world. Ceefax trained an entire country to expect instant, menu-driven information at home. It taught journalists to write with brutal efficiency. It gave millions of people their first experience of pulling data on demand instead of waiting for scheduled broadcasts. And then it was gone, switched off at 23:32 on a Tuesday night in October 2012, replaced by digital services that could do everything Ceefax did, but faster, prettier, with more content and actual interactivity. The farewell message stayed on screen for a few seconds, thanking viewers for watching. 38 years of 3-digit codes, Saturday afternoon score updates, waiting for pages to cycle through, yellow text on black backgrounds, all compressed into a single goodbye. The technology that had accidentally invented on-demand home information in Britain disappeared the same way it had arrived, quietly, embedded in a television signal, noticed mostly by people who remembered what it meant to press the text button and wait.